Hello, Lions, and welcome to your Annotated Bibliography Sources video helper. So this video helper is going to be to help you understand the different types of sources, the bias of sources, and then how to cite the sources and use the sources in your annotated bibliography. So in your Mac and Via group, there is this document right here. This document basically introduces you to the different types of sources that you are going to encounter in the opposing viewpoints or the global issues um, databases. So there might be some like encyclopedia type articles in the reference section of global issues and opposing viewpoints. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But there's definitely going to be magazine articles. Magazines are a collection of articles and images about lots of different topics of popular interest, current events. They're written by journalists, so they often contain adult content, but the magazines cover very serious material um, eh, but to find consistent scholarly information, you should use academic journals. So magazines are now published online. They used to be published in print. Um, but all magazine articles need to be examined for accuracy, bias, and fact checked. Okay. Reference and nonfiction ebooks. These are typically um, they can contain bias, but they have mainly facts, and they have a lot less bias. And so they basically synthesize information and support information by topic. Okay, and then you've got your news sources. All news sources should be examined for accuracy, bias, and fact check. They all are contributed to by varying levels of journalists and reporters and people who, can claim that something is a news source and they are a reporter or a journalist for that news source. Anyone can make those claims. Those are very sort of loose terms. That always need to be put under scrutiny, okay, no matter what the publication is, okay, even publications with a robust reputation should still be analyzed and examined for accuracy and bias and fact checked. Okay. So I'm going to skip this media bias fact check because I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But scholarly and academic journals, these are a collection of articles written by scholars in a professional or academic field. They are often reviewed by an editorial board of people from that field who peer review them and make sure that the information in them um, is up to the highest standards in that field. Academic and scholarly journals can contain bias, and usually in a scholarly or academic journal article, they may even inform you at some point of the bias of the researchers. So that's something to look for as well. So down here we have a kind of a neatly laid out comparison between scholarly journals or academic journals, trade journals, and then popular journals. So this kind of can help you understand the difference, who writes for these, and what is the documentation and things like that. And then there's an explanation here of peer-reviewed journals and scholarly journals. So peer-reviewed journals, again, they go through highly critical and rigorous review process by people in that field or specialty before they are published. Okay. Um, Scholarly journals, although peer-reviewed, are always scholarly in nature. Scholarly journals are not always peer-reviewed, though. So an academic or scholarly journal does not necessarily mean that it's peer-reviewed. So that's an important distinction. So this document is in your Mac and Via group, and you can refer to it at any time. Media bias fact check. So this is a source that you are going to use, particularly when you are looking at news articles. Okay, so for instance, if I'm let's just take one for example. Well, I'm gonna put in here the New York Times. Okay, this is a very uh, long-standing news source within the United States. So the New York Times, when we look it up in media bias fact check, so this is what you would, if you were using an article from the New York Times, you would look in here and you would look at, they have a left center bias. So you'll notice over here, Media Bias Fact Check has placed them pretty far to the left. So least bias would be here, right? So they're pretty far over here, left center. Um, so overall, we rate the New York Times left center bias based on wording and story selection and moderately favors the left. They are considered one of the most reliable sources for news information due to proper sourcing and well-respected journalists and editors. The failed fact checks were on op-eds and not straight news reporting. So then we can look down here and be like, bias rating left center. Factual reporting was high. Um, and then their credibility rating was high credibility. And then it's good to note here that when they failed fact checks, those were in opinion pieces that are written and they are in the opinion section of the news. So it's clear that these are people's opinions and therefore they're not necessarily fact checking all the things in their opinions. So that's just an example of how to use media bias fact check. You just type in the source and then it's going to give you some information about it. All right. So that is in here as well. So if you're using any news sources, you can check their bias rating. All right. So in the browse issues, I went to food waste. That is my issue. And you'll notice here there's these different types of sources. Your teachers want you to have at least 4 sources. I would suggest no more than 6, but 4 to 6 seems like a good number for what you all are working on. And so you are going to acquire those sources here. Now, one of the things I would recommend is that you use a variety of sources, that you don't just pull 4 news articles and be like, here's my 4 sources. I would suggest that you see if there are any reference articles first, because those are going to get you a nice, for the most part, objective, bias free information about your topic. And so there will likely be something in one of the reference articles that's going to directly relate to your research question. So I highly recommend using one of those. So let's say I was going to use this article to get the citation. I would click on that site and copy and paste this into my annotated bibliography right here where it says citation. Then I would examine the article. But knowing that it is a reference article is going to tip me off to the fact that there's probably very little bias in here. It's probably mainly information and facts and figures and things like that that are going to be related to my issue. Okay. Another source that you may let's talk about the viewpoints. So you've already maybe looked at some of the viewpoints in here. Just know that the viewpoints are there because they do have bias and opinion in them on the issue. So whenever you click on one of the viewpoints, they are going to have a viewpoint that is somewhere on, on the scale of bias. Okay. So these little color things indicate too. So this is a level 3 content level. This is a level 4. This is a level 5. That just means that the content level is going to be more dense. It's going to be more technical in language, that sort of thing. So this would be a great example of a viewpoint with bias and opinion in it. This is don't blame millennials for widespread food waste. So clearly someone at some point said, it's the millennials' fault that we have so much food waste. So you'll notice here at the top, it's going to give you some commentary and it's going to tell you a little bit about the journalist. This is a freelance journalist. Her work appears in Guardian, The Telegraph, Independent, Time Out, Vice, Vogue, BuzzFeed. So wherever this particular article came from The Guardian. Okay, so this particular article came from The Guardian. So Guardian is what you would put in the Media Bias Fact Check website to check what is the media bias of Guardian. But then you would also, read the article to determine, because even though Guardian may have, a left or right or center or whatever their bias is, you want to check and see, because the article, even though it appeared in, a left center or a right center piece, doesn't necessarily mean that that journalist in the article has the same bias that the publication does. So you want to double check that. So you can determine what the bias of the actual journalist and the article is. Okay. But again, you would cite it the same way. Click that cite button. All right. So the viewpoints, you're definitely going to want to check the bias of the wherever the article came from, but then also you're going to have to check the bias in the article, and the viewpoint should be very clear how where the writer or the author of the article falls in regards to their opinion on the issue. All right, so speaking of that, let's go ahead and hit up our news section right here. So news is going to operate the same way. So you'll notice here's something from the New York Times, here's something from CNN Wire, here's something from the Washington Post. So we have some different publications in here. You can also, when you're looking at news, depending on how many news articles there are, you can sort by the publication title if you want to filter them that way. So we can see here what some of the different, so we've got USA Today in here. So we've got some different things. So you could determine, well, I definitely want something from, the Washington Post, or I definitely want something from USA Today. So I'm going to look at those first. So you can filter that way. You can also filter by the publication date. Maybe you want the most recent things, or maybe you want something that's older. Depending on what your research question is and what you're trying to pull out from your sources here. Okay. You can also, you'll notice right here is the topic finder. So when you're in the news articles here, you can come over here to our topic finder. Oh, what's happening here? Let's go back. I don't know why it's not working. Let's try it one more time. There may be too few things for it to work on this particular one. So, whoops. I'm going to go back to my. So if that happens, it probably means there's just too few things for it to work, because there's only 815 articles in here, so that may be too few. But you can sort here by newest, you can sort by document title, you can sort by the content level. Remember how I showed you those right there? So there's lots of different ways that you can sort these to go through them a little quicker. Let's look at magazines. Magazines are going to be very similar to news, and you're going to want to check the source in media bias fact check, and then you're also going to want to check the article for the bias of the author, the person that wrote the article. But again, you can do all the same things over here. You can sort by publication title, lots of different ways to sort here as well. And so those are going to be definitely sources again. So you're going to have your viewpoints, which are going to have bias and opinion. Magazines and news, lots of bias and opinion. Reference are going to be your most neutral things. Academic journals are a whole different animal. So it's not that they are unbiased or that they are bias free, because they generally will have bias. But you're going to have to look at the article pretty closely to determine what that bias is, unless the authors state their bias at some point in their paper. You'll notice this little check mark here. This tells you that this particular article is peer reviewed. So it's gone through that extra level of scholarly checks. So if it's peer reviewed, it just gives you that much more confidence in the viability, credibility of the article. Okay. There's also going to be, there might not be in all, but some will have some infographics. So you might want to check those out and look at those. Those might be a great source as well. And then depending on if there's websites, you may want to look at some of the websites that are listed. Because again, they may offer you some additional excellent information that may directly relate to your research question. So those are kind of a breakdown of the things. If you use images in your presentation, when you end up doing your presentation, I highly suggest that you use the images from the databases, because we have permission to use these images and you can cite them in your presentation. So I just wanted to point that out, that there are images in here that you can and probably should use when you do your presentation, because your teachers don't want you to spend a lot of time making the presentation super fancy. So this would be a great place to get some solid images, and then you have the citations, and you know that you have the right to use those as long as you cite them. So that's kind of a breakdown of these. Now, a couple of things I want to point out. If you go to the advanced search, there's some things you can do. So you can put in your overarching topic. So remember, mine is food waste. That's my issue. And then you can come down here to this topic finder, and hopefully it's working. I think it will. But you can put in your topic, and then it is going to display the results in a couple of different ways. It'll display them in these tiles, and then you can also click and change it to a wheel if you would like. But basically what this does is it takes your topic in the middle, and then here are some other breakdowns of food waste. And then these are even more more micro breakdowns of the topic. So if I wanted to, you know, uh, if I wanted to look at these, remember my question had climate change in it. So if I wanted to look at just the food waste and climate change articles, there are 9 here. These are probably going to be directly related in some way to my research question. So this would be a great place for me to start. And it also, again, tells me that my research question is not too broad and not too narrow, because there are 9 articles that deal directly with my topic and climate change. Okay. So that is an excellent way to do that. Another thing that you can do is go to advanced search here, and I can put in the 2 main terms from my research question. So food waste and climate change, and click search. And so now I have even fewer articles than my food waste. So remember, I was looking at all of these things from the overarching issue of food waste, which is fine. You can do that and go through them that way. But I can also put in just those 2 very minimal search terms. Don't put in a whole bunch. Don't write a question. Don't put in, 4 or 5 phrases, because you're going to get like no results. Um, But there's 3 viewpoints about climate change and food waste. There's only 57 news articles. There's 5 videos, 5 academic journal articles, 1 website, and a couple of magazines. This would be something that I could go through these and figure out, and skim the articles pretty quickly and figure out which ones are going to best apply to my question and choose 4. I could probably get at least 1 viewpoint article out of this. Um, Definitely a magazine article, and probably a couple of news articles. If I wanted to do this that way, I could maybe even use this website. So that would be another great way for you to find your sources. What I don't want you to do is get frustrated, because if you put too many things in these databases, if you put too many search terms in here, it's going to kick back that there's no results. You're going to be like, there's nothing here that relates to my topic. The other thing you have to do is you have to actually click on these, and you have to actually read the articles. So I would have to click on this article and actually read it to determine if this is going to be an article that addresses my research question. And if it is, then I can use it and put it over here on my annotated bib and start this process with it. Okay. But you're going to have to read the articles. You're not going to be able to just be like, oh, there's so many, I don't know what to do. So try not to get overwhelmed. Try to narrow it down and really think about your research question in terms of what is researchable. Okay. So that is your sources video for this PBA. If y'all have questions or you need help along the way, let me know. But that is how you're going to acquire sources for your research topic. Good luck, Lions.